Hi again everyone and welcome to Final Descent UK for March's AAIB Bulletin debrief. Quick one to start. On 10th of December last year, a Loganair Embraer 145 registration Golf Sierra Alpha Juliet Echo was climbing out of Edinburgh Airport when a cabin crew member slipped on de-icing fluid present near the front of the aircraft. The crew member was able to continue with essential safety duties but was excused from doing the drink service. When seen in hospital, the ankle was found to be fractured. We've discussed the definition of an aircraft accident before, whilst briefly touching on another Loganair incident when a cabin crew member was injured by a bin. I wish the crew member a speedy recovery. Next, another Ryanair altitude bust at Stansted. The last one we covered in January's Bulletin debrief, and I'll put a link to that below. This time, on the 8th of March 2024, a Ryanair 737 MAX 8-200 was returning to Stansted from Szczecin, any Polish viewers in Poland. The flight was uneventful and the co-pilot was pilot flying. Runway 4 was in use and the weather was good. The aircraft was stable on final approach at 500 feet above the ground and the co-pilot disconnected the autopilot and autothrottle. But then the approach started to become unstable, with the indicated airspeed becoming too slow and the aircraft drifting above the glide slope. Despite efforts to correct, the commander felt the aircraft would land too hard, so called for a go-around just 15 feet above the ground. This was manually flown to an altitude of 3,000 feet, which, as you can see from the ILS chart for runway 4 at Stansted, is part of the standard missed approach procedure. There was a brief discussion with air traffic control regarding the go-around, and with the flight crew confirming that they were ready for another approach, air traffic control instructed the aircraft to turn left onto a downwind heading. The flight crew discussed who would make the second approach and program the flight computer. The co-pilot said that he would program the flight computer and the commander declared, "I have control," with the co-pilot responding, "You have control." However, the co-pilot did not state that the autopilot and autothrottle were disengaged, and while still in the turn, the commander noticed the aircraft were descending and had already descended 600 feet in total. He took control and climbed back to 3,000 feet, engaging the autothrottle and autopilot. Because the deviation from clearance was more than 200 feet, this meets the criteria for a level bust. Air traffic control didn't notice the level bust as they were busy coordinating the next departure. There was also a helicopter in the area operating under visual flight rules, but clearance was sufficient between both aircraft. After the incident, the commander reflected that they should have perhaps asked for more time after the go-around to ensure the missed approach procedure was fully completed, which would have ensured the autopilot and autothrottle were both engaged. He also realised that any handover of control should be completed in line with company procedures, and that the state of the aircraft should be clear. As for the co-pilot, he stated it was the first time he'd handed over control during manual flight and was unfamiliar with the precise call-outs required. As for ATC, NATS commented that the air traffic control officers are usually alerted to level bust by a vertical displacement advisory tool, but this only applies above 6,500 feet to prevent spurious alerts, for example when an aircraft is following the step climbs in a standard departure or approach procedure. This incident shows that distractions and rapid decision making can easily lead to a loss of control even in a short period of time. 600 feet of height was lost. Ryanair has expanded the handover of control guidance in their Boeing 737 flight operations manual as a result of that incident. We'll now discuss a few accidents from general aviation. First, on 10th of October last year, a flight designed CTSW registration Golf Charlie Foxtrot Juliet and its pilot were planning to make a local flight out of Carlisle Airport in Cumbria. He had completed pre-flight checks, including latching the left cabin door closed, as that's the door that he'd used to enter the aircraft. He started the engine and taxied to holding point Alpha for runway 19, where he completed pre-flight departure checks. As the flight was being made before the airport's official opening time, the pilot was making blind calls on the air-ground frequency. The pilot applied full power, released the brakes, and the aircraft accelerated normally. During the ground roll, the aircraft ran across a joint in the paved runway surface and the pilot heard a rattle from the left door. He glanced down and he thought that the door was open as he noticed a gap between the door and the rest of the aircraft. However, the aircraft was now flying at speed and he continued with takeoff and he rotated to a climbing attitude. The door then suddenly opened, passing approximately 50 to 100 feet, and the pilot reported that he was hit with tremendous turbulence in the cockpit with maps and papers flying around in front of his face. He was also concerned about visible flexing he could see of the now open door and the possibility that it might detach and strike the aircraft's tail. He tried to close the door with both hands whilst holding the control column with his knees, but was unsuccessful. He decided to reduce engine power and try again, and this time managed to close the door but was unable to lock it. During this attempt at locking and closing the door, the aircraft entered a stall with the right wing dropping. Despite responding to this by lowering the nose and applying full power, the aircraft was unable to recover due to the low altitude and it struck an open area of soft ground outside the airport's perimeter fence. The pilot sustained serious injuries to his face and foot. The wreckage was examined by the AAIB and there was found to be significant wear to the 3 door latching pins at the point where the pin bears against the door's aperture when it's in a closed position. The AAIB decided to examine 3 other similar aircraft and similar wear was found in the door latch pins. However, the owners of those aircraft had not reported any uncommanded door opening incidents with the door correctly closed and latched. As you can see from the image provided in the report, door closing, opening and latching is achieved with a single lever, and this lever needs to be in the closed detent position to ensure proper locking. The AAIB's opinion was that even despite the wear found, it was unlikely the door would have opened if it was properly latched closed. Therefore, theorised because of the bumps on the ground, the lever would have become easily displaced into the open position, and given that on this type of aircraft door opening is aided by a gas spring similar to what you might find on a car's boot, the door would have easily become rapidly open. The accident highlights the importance of ensuring that all aircraft hatches and doors are closed prior to flight. Next, a Piper PA-28 Cherokee registration Golf Bravo Alpha X-Ray Zulu suffered an accident whilst landing at Skegness airfield in Lincolnshire. The aircraft had landed normally on the grass runway but veered off and entered a drainage ditch, striking its far side. The pilot was found unconscious after the accident and couldn't recall anything after the final approach. A passenger who also held a PPL was knocked out as well and didn't know why the aircraft had departed the runway. The passenger regained consciousness with his torso on the right wing, and it's worth noting that the PA-28 only has a single entry door and that's on the passenger side, but he couldn't be sure if he was thrown from the aircraft on impact or if he had lost consciousness while trying to exit the aircraft after the crash. The pilot didn't know if he became unconscious because of the accident or beforehand, but the passenger recalled during the landing roll calling to the pilot that the aircraft was veering off the runway and received no response. The aircraft was badly damaged in the accident and was written off. Subsequent examination showed no reason for the loss of directional control, and the AAIB couldn't reliably ascertain why the aircraft left the runway after landing. As a side issue, they did speculate that perhaps the occupants' seatbelts were not properly fastened, given the passenger was possibly thrown out of the aircraft during the accident sequence. The last incident to discuss was a runway overrun at Rochester Airport in Kent. Also a PA-28, the events took place on the 14th of August 2024. The 79-year-old pilot was conducting a cross-country flight from Lydd to Rochester in Golf Echo Papa Yankee Whiskey, and he contacted Rochester Aerodrome Flight Information Service, who informed him that the wind direction favoured runway 2. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what an AFIS or Aerodrome Flight Information Service is, I'll briefly explain the levels of air traffic control available at airfields in the UK. The top level of service is a full air traffic control service which can only be provided by air traffic control officers or ATCOs. Air traffic control can instruct aircraft in the air or on the ground, and compliance with their instructions is mandatory. The next level down, if you like, is an AFIS, the aforementioned Aerodrome Flight Information Service. They can easily be identified with the call sign information after a location name and provide information to pilots on the conduct of their flights at the airfield and within its associated air traffic zone. In the UK, an AFIS can issue mandatory instructions on the ground up until the runway holding point. This is a UK difference from the ICAO rules, as in most states, AFIS do not issue instructions at all. They don't, however, issue instructions in the air, but they may request position reports consistent with published procedures. Then you have an air-ground or AG communication service, which is the most basic form you'll encounter at aerodromes throughout the UK. Their call sign suffix is radio, and they don't have a formal status as an air traffic control service. They can provide traffic information and weather information to pilots in the vicinity or on an aerodrome, but cannot issue clearances or instructions either on the air or the ground. Then the level below that is nothing. Unattended aerodromes are quite common throughout the UK, and a common frequency referred to as SafetyCom 135.480 MHz is used at these airfields by aircraft to announce their position and intentions. Now back to the incident in question. The pilot didn't feel comfortable with his final approach to runway 2 and elected to go around. At the same time, the AFISO informed the aircraft to land at your discretion 02, but at that speed you might want to go around. As I've said, the pilot was already doing so and he entered a left-hand circuit. On the downwind leg, the AFISO advised Golf Yankee Whiskey you might want to come and do a 180 and come in on 20. The wind has changed direction, favouring 20. The pilot acknowledged that information and flew to a climbing right-hand orbit to reposition. The aircraft was configured for landing and the pilot felt his approach was stable. He touched down on runway 20 and the aircraft bounced several times, with the pilot applying the brakes hard but felt the aircraft was skidding and not slowing down. The aircraft approached the airfield boundary rapidly and the pilot pulled back hard on the yoke in an attempt to stall the wings and slow the aircraft down. Instead, it became airborne, clearing the boundary fence and a local road before coming to rest in a wooded embankment as per the image. The pilot was uninjured. You can see from the image how close the aircraft was to the M2, and the embankment where it came to rest sloped steeply towards the motorway. Both wings had become detached from the fuselage due to the impact, and that resulted in a fuel leak. This image demonstrates the flight path with the initial approach and go around in yellow and the subsequent orbit and landing in blue. Data was downloaded from a flight planning and navigation application being used by the pilot, and the ground speed data was retrieved. The aircraft's speed in the landing flare was 91 knots and it touched down approximately 190 metres from the runway's threshold, slowing down to only 45 knots by the time it reached the boundary fence. The pilot's operating handbook for the PA-28 gives an approach speed of 75 knots with a final approach speed of 66 knots using 40 degrees of flaps. So the aircraft was flying significantly faster than recommended on final approach. Calculating the required landing distance using the safety factors recommended by the Civil Aviation Authority gives a distance of 627 metres. Runway 0220 at Rochester has a grass surface and is 830 metres long. There would no doubt have been some human factors at work here. The pilot had just done a go-around, which is a high workload situation, and his attention was already nearing full capacity when receiving runway change information which would have further increased his workload. This likely resulted in the AFISO suggestion being followed without any time for any consideration of any further implications. The resulting circuit had a shorter base leg and a shorter final, which reduced the time available to slow the aircraft down, causing a long landing and runway overrun. Remember that information from AFISOs when in the air are not instructions, and the pilot can choose to ignore them if necessary. The pilot in this case could have requested the AFISO to stand by before responding and simply not accept the runway suggested, or choose to remain in the overhead or leave the area and attempt a fresh approach. The CAA have a safety sense leaflet number 31, Distraction and Interruption in General Aviation Operations, which I'll link below. It provides strategies to help pilots manage the impact of air traffic calls. Thanks for watching again on Final Descent UK. Remember to like, comment, subscribe and share. Bye for now.